And our final guest this time is artist Ed Lister. Let's go inside Ed's studio and meet him. Hey there, Ed.
Hey, David.
Good to see you.
Good to meet you.
Yeah.
Come on in.
Well, we're seated comfortably in your old kitchen chairs here, Ed.
Hand painted.
Yeah, I think I may got a little paint on my jeans there. This is a great space that you have. How'd you get it?
Well, we sold the house about 2 years ago where I had a nice studio. And I put an ad in the local paper and somebody phoned and said, you know, there's a studio space available in Montecito, reasonable rate. Are you interested? I said, sure, I'll take it. So it's a little bit on the dark side, but we got northern light, which seems to be important to some painters. I'm very familiar with the colors I use, so I don't. That's not super critical, but it's you know, a workable space, and I can stretch my imagination here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, we're going to talk about kind of the broad spectrum of your work, and I know that you began by doing scenic painting for all sorts of different things. How did you find your way into that?
Well, when I came over from England in the 70s, I was working in TV because it was a good income. You know, it was very well paid for what you did. And the same union, it had to become a union job, the same union represented film, TV, and theatre. Well, TV was the lowest level of the grading, as it were, and the theatre was the more pure traditional type of painting for backdrops, theatrical feelings and so forth. And I fell into that at the Taper downtown in LA, and I ended up within a year or so of just running the place, the scenic, that is, the scenic painting. And I got to know a lot about large-scale painting. The Taper was one of the show theatres we had to paint for. And the sight lines there, because it was a first stage, the sight lines for people sitting on either side of the horseshoe were like about 150 feet of backdrop. So that was pretty big backdrop. Yeah, so a lot of paint. And you know, if you paint and you've got an eye for painting, you can sort of scale up and work on a larger scale. I found it very easy to paint that size. And I really liked painting big. It was 40 foot high, I think, and 130 foot odd wide. And, you know, somebody had to paint it. It was a union job. I got in people who knew what they were doing, and I was spry enough to sort of observe what they were doing. And after a while, I left that and became freelance in the movie business and TV commercials downtown in LA, and that was not quite as intellectually as stimulating as the true theater, but it was vibrant in that it was immediate, it was very demanding, and it was on a deadline. And it's great if you're working on a deadline, it sort of powers you through and you get a much more dynamic image. And I was doing big skies, and there's one up there which is a sketch for an art director who wanted 100 and...
This is in Japan, right?
No, it was a Japanese commercial over here.
Oh, okay.
Because they love to get on an expense account and come to Hollywood, you see, and play golf. But anyway, it was 400 feet, 3 sides of a stage at MGM, and that was 40 foot high. So it was quite a few thousand square feet. And not only good money, but it had to be out in a week. So it was very dynamic. You had to really punch it out.
So you had a team of assistants, I assume.
Yeah, but I mean, I do a lot of the painting myself, obviously, but it was, yeah, it was a team effort, yeah.
So, I mean, that was exciting work. And what are some of the other particular things that you worked on that you still think, oh man, I can't believe I did this or that?
Well, I worked with some of the better directors from Hollywood because they found out that they could make very, very good money doing TV commercials. And a film would be like a 6-month, 8-month project for them as well as for the scenic artist. But if you did a TV commercial, it was over in a week and the money was really far better. Yeah. Really better. And that was the driving force, not only the money, but the dynamic of having to get it out in a week. And that's what we did.
So you were doing desert scenes for car
anything,
and stuff like
yeah, desert scenes, anything which ultimately was taken over by either green screen or a computer. You know, it was a lot easier and cheaper to press a button and have a nice landscape behind the car or whatever the subject matter was, the commercial. So that meant that we had to rethink approach to painting. I came up here to Santa Barbara in the mid-90s, and about that time was when computers took over from what I used to paint. This is nothing to do with theatre now, because that's another story. That was further back in chronological times. But the fact that I was up here and not getting jobs from LA, I took very personally. But in fact, it was just the nature of the business.
Industry was just
Yeah.
changing, yeah.
So I did I broadened my landscape, and I did jobs back east for casinos and hotels. One of the bigger ones I did was for the Mohegan Casino in Connecticut. The last of the Mohegans, actually, there were about 10 of them, and they had some land, so they put up a casino. And I painted some really big murals for that. That was a huge job.
Well, we have a lot of video of you at a mural here in town, which is really important. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, about 2 or 3 years ago, I got a call from Faye Bisnow, who's the wife of Dr. Bisnow. Dr. Bisnow and Dick Scholl, who lives in Montecito, had got together, and they had seen the clockwork within the clock room of the clock tower, and they thought it was a Seth Thomas clock, and they thought it needed a greater exposure, that they would turn it into a little museum. Previous to that, it had been a broom closet full of paints and janitorial supplies, but it was a lovely piece of mechanism for clockwork, designed in, I think the previous century, I should say, the 19th century. And what they decided to do was clean the inside out, turn it into a small museum with access for people who come to visit the top of the tower, to see the view. And pretty well described to them how time evolved, how the keeping of time evolved, clocks evolved, timekeeping, right from early imagery like, which I illustrated, Egyptian water clocks, Chinese clocks, the first clocks in the Roman times, just a drip from a bucket of water would tell the time, candle clocks, and how it went through the Age of Enlightenment, essentially. This is the back wall, the west wall, and how quite a few of the technical pieces of the clock were invented by, as it happens, English people. There's Thomas Tompion, George Graham, John Harrison, you may know about, who's a brilliant carpenter from England, who in fact devised a way of finding where longitude was. How he devised and built a clock. He built 4 clocks in his lifetime, and the final one won the competition for the most accurate clock, which the Navy at the time wanted, a very accurate way of making time, so that the ship would know where it was on the high seas.
Well, it's that big tradition of historical murals. I mean, that I think of from the WPA, the 30s and stuff like that.
This is not WPA. This had to be more of an educational thing.
Yeah, but I'm thinking that one of the things that they tried to do was to tell a historical story in the images that they're laying out.
Yeah. Well, these are not WPA times, and my brief by Dr. Bisnow was, could I paint something which would, school kids come by and they say, well, what's that? And the docents there have to be boned up on what that is.
Right.
There's about 80 to 100 different images scattered from left to right is about 60 feet of imagery, and they all had a reason to be there. How time came with the Spanish to the missions, and how there was no real need for a clock, but there was a need for telling of time, i.e., come to prayer, go work, eat. So the church bell was the representation of a clock at that time. The Spanish didn't actually have clocks here, but they had the bell system, and that led to the keeping of time and the pattern of the day.
To what extent were you kind of given you must touch these bases, and what leeway did you have to kind of?
I was given. Initially, I was given. I was research, a whole bunch of books by Dr. Bisnow. I was very enthusiastic, and the more I read, the more I had to include stuff which I didn't know about. I mean, Fleming, the guy who's a Scottish engineer who did the Trans-Canadian Railway, he realized that there's going to be a problem if there's no time rationale from East Coast to West Coast. If you don't have a time zone system, trains will actually meet on the same track going towards each other. In fact, I think in the 1850s in Albany, you could be on a platform station, it'll say Boston time, New York time, and Buffalo time, and they were all different. So he had to rationalize it. This is Fleming. This is one little item. He's in the mural. Mm-hmm. He's up there. And we arrived at 1929, which is when the clock tower went up, and that was the end of the story, because after that the clock became less visually interesting and became an atomic clock, which was in a grey box. Mm-hmm. And so it made a timely finish in 1929. So we got pictures of mass-producing clocks in Connecticut with Seth Thomas. We got Lindbergh. He has a connection with, this is the Spirit of St. Louis, which was built in Long Beach, but was financed by Mrs. Knight, who was from St. Louis, but she had a place in Montecito, so that was the Montecito connection. So that gave me a little bit of imagery coming back into the 1920s and connects that way. So I was looking for sort of not only circular movements that keep the whole imagery rolling, because you've got 60 foot long mm-hmm. by only 7 foot high. How do you keep the eye wandering from left to right? I don't know about you, when I go into a museum or a gallery, I always go to the left and head right.
I guess I do too.
It's a bit like writing a letter. So in a sense, it was Stonehenge, Egyptian water clocks, Chinese, back in the almost dark ages, although they were very informative about how to do all this, that's on the left, and you sort of read through to the right, coming up to the 20th century on the right-hand side.
Well, it's a spectacular achievement of people who haven't seen it. Good to go down there. It's open.
It's open twice. Well, I'm not sure the timing. Because of the machinery, children tend to put little fingers in little, and I'm not sure the liability insurance covers that. But it will be a docent led, I think, twice a day, or of course by appointment. But I think 10 and 2 o'clock. I could be wrong on that, but it'll be escorted because it's got a glass wall you can see in, but you can't go in. And you won't be led by a docent until those times.
Right. Okay. Well, let's segue from that to your studio here. I mean, we're in the midst of blue right now on either side of us, and as we look beyond the camera, there are a lot of seascapes. Tell me about them.
Well, I guess it's my English background. I've always lived close to water, and coming here to Santa Barbara, within stone's throw of the oceans. These are the seascapes I saw from the deck of my house, and I painted that. I was just an observer of the times of day and the atmospheres, and the underwater paintings are since I left that house. So in other words, having sold the house, we moved into an apartment, and therefore it's not claustrophobic. It's just that it's the horizons close in. Mm-hmm. And I became very interested in the swimmers when they had the water polo at the Olympics. How between scoring, when they all swim back to their ends, they're all sort of pulling at each other's underwear and so forth. The figures in limbo I found really fascinating. Yeah. So these are halfway through. They eventually go as blue as that down there.
Well, yeah, I mean, we walked in their process, which is kind of working with these little dots, right?
Well, it's just a spatter.
Yeah.
It's a way of, without using a brush. I didn't want to tell the story of the painting with a brush. I wanted to keep it a step back. So this will build up into a solid blue like that, with a continual spatter of little drops of color. And you, of course, can change the hues so that towards the bottom here, for instance, you're getting a little bit of red coming through.
Going down the bottom of the pool here. Yeah.
Well, to the bottom of the actual pool.
Yeah. Pretty spectacular. So and they're big too. I mean, this seems to echo back to your work with.
Yeah, exactly. I like to work big, and I relish commissions which are on the larger size. And this I don't have any plans for, but I just wanted to do it big. This is 10 foot by 8 foot.
Well, when you think back here now, you're still an active painter, but you've had a long, illustrious career. What else do you want to do? I mean, we're looking at water. Is that something that you think will continue on? I mean, I know it's hard for any artist to predict what their passions will become, but what do you think?
Well, I'll strain this for what it's worth, because I'm fascinated by it. There's always something different happening underwater, and it's very difficult to paint. And I'm not totally there yet with this one, for instance. I'm still, when I come in the morning, I think, oh gee, maybe I'll change this or change that. So it's a painterly process. Usually when I'm painting skies or given artwork, I'll do what's given to me, boom, switch it off and it's done. Whereas the painting's here to annoy me all the time just by its presence, so I tend to come in and pick at it and change it. And that sounds like
a 7-day cycle on this one.
No, it's been up for some time. What I'd like to do is sort of like fold it up and forget about it for a few months, but it's there. It's too big to do that, so I'm forever sort of making changes, which is part of the painting process.
I think we just have a minute or two left. I'd love to hear you give a word of advice to any viewers. What would you say to a young artist, someone who's considering a career in art?
I'd learn to walk before running. There's so many painters who, bless their hearts, they go running in full tilt, and they don't have the skills or the knowledge or the basics of really knowing how to draw. I think drawing is absolutely critical to the first few years of an artist's life. He's got to know that he can draw, and knowing that structure can be a basis for any other artistic endeavor, painting-wise. You've got to have the confidence. You've got to know that you can do it.